France is in political turmoil. That's a good thing. The status quo has not been good for working people in France or in the U.S. Political turmoil is giving the French people an opportunity for change that cannot be missed. We want to thank you for joining us today in Facing Reality for Social Justice, as we talk to John Mullen, who is a Marxist and a longtime resident in France. This conversation will help us understand the varying forces in contention for political power in the country, and possibly can give us both hope and direction for understanding struggles around the world. So here's John. Well, John, when we first started to talk about setting up this interview, what I assumed would be that we were talking about how the left in France would try to deal with a right-wing government. And obviously, that didn't happen. And things change, and they change fairly quickly in this world of ours, I guess. And what I'd like to do down the road, or eventually in this conversation, is go through the players so we know exactly who's who and what role they're playing in all of this. But before we do that, if you could give us just an update on, since things change so frequently, give us an update on what's the situation today, so we have a context that we're working with.
Yes, so the situation today is that neither of the three biggest organizations have a majority in parliament, neither the left, nor President Macron's group, nor the far right of Le Pen and Bardella. This is an organization which has a fascist core, but a more general far right organization. So there is no government, and also the constitution will not allow to have another elections for a year. And it seems extremely difficult to think of any likely coalition which could actually exist.
Oh, well, that's complicated, and much more complicated in the sense of trying to figure out what direction to go in. And it's also adds to the complexity is that Macron, the president of the country, doesn't want to sort of recognize the reality of what happened in the last election. And could you go over what his legal responsibilities are and the possibilities of what he can do or not do, so we have an idea of what the situation is with that?
Yeah, that's right. So he wrote a letter to the French people the other day where he claimed that nobody had won the elections. He didn't mention that his party had definitely lost because he lost, I think, almost 100 members of parliament. Whereas so traditionally, but it's not obligatory, traditionally, the president will name a prime minister from the biggest parliamentary group, even if they don't have an overall majority. And so the left today is demanding that a left prime minister be named. And there's going to be a whole load of street demonstrations next week to protest about the fact that so far Macron has refused to do that. Macron is hoping that a coalition of his lot with some of the right and some of the left, excluding both the neo-fascist Rassemblement National, and also excluding the radical left France in Revolt, France Insoumise. So he's hoping that there's a coalition in the middle. The numbers don't make up to a full majority, though, and also that would mean flying in the face of tradition, which is that the first chance to form a government is by the biggest group. So that's what he's doing at the moment. So there are not that many things that he's obliged to do, but he's also rather worried about what kind of protests would kick off if he doesn't do what he's expected to do.
Well, I assume he'll start to find that out pretty soon. But let's go through the players a little bit, if you don't mind, so we have a little bit of a sense of who we're talking about. When you talk about the National Rally organization or party, what you're effectively talking about is a neo-fascist, as you say, a neo-fascist government. But it's different than what you had in Italy and in Germany, in the sense that they don't have that particular power. Even if they came into power, they wouldn't have that yet. But at the same time, that's an organization that is part of an international right-wing development in Italy and in France. Some of the stuff that's going on here in the United States Could you talk a little bit about what that organization is like? Is it a disciplined party? How disciplined is it? Is it more of a coalition? How does it work? So we have it, who are the problems here?
Yes, indeed. So obviously, well, the major player is the National Rally under the under the leadership of Marine Le Pen and her young protege Jordan Bardella. And what has happened is that they've been very successful in persuading people that they've left their fascist past behind them. And in fact, only 41% of the French population now think of the National Rally as a threat to democracy. So how did they do that? Well, they threw out anybody who made openly anti-Semitic or Nazi comments. So they expelled her own father. She expelled her own father because he couldn't stop himself from making references to the Holocaust and suggesting that it wasn't so bad. He couldn't stop himself. That was his DNA. So they threw him out and pretended to change. And indeed, they had last year they had 70 or 80 members of parliament, and they're well known for going to every car boot sale in town, or as you say in the States, garage sale, and shaking a lot of hands and being pretty discreet. And so they've managed to detoxify their public image very well. It's not so much a coalition. It's fairly united around, nevertheless, the old program. And it says at the top of their leaflets, "We will defend your identity and your borders." So it's still about building up an alliance of white people against sometimes imaginary and sometimes real non-white people. So that's who the National Rally really is. Now, they've been so successful in detoxifying themselves that they got invited to a big demonstration against anti-Semitism last year. And at the moment, they're claiming that we will defend Jews against left anti-Semitism. So it's really gone a very long way. However, the other very important thing to note is that they've decided to go through Parliament and the media. In most towns, they have almost no party structure. They at one point they got 13 million votes, but they have not had in the last decades a demonstration on the streets of more than 5,000 or 6,000 people. Normally, if you get 13 million votes, you can do it. You can organize a demonstration with 50,000 people. They can't do it. So their idea is to start through the institutions, but they will need to build an organization on the ground. Well, I'm hoping that it will be possible to stop them from doing so. But that's a very, very important thing, that they're centered in Parliament, the institutions. A lot of help from the media. Every morning you switch on the television, there's some well-dressed Nazi telling you the best way to reorganize agriculture in France and stuff like that. So that's more or less who they are.
Yeah, well, that's one of the questions I was wondering about. You have organizations that, as you say, have so many people who are supporters. At the same time, what's the real world about on the streets? And I think you started to give somewhat of an answer to that they don't have much of a presence at this point on the streets. And so what they are is somebody who's running for office and trying to take power, well, not take power, but they're trying to get into government and to do what they need to do through that way. But they were
obviously at that point it would be much easier for them to build a street level organization if they were in the government.
But it's also different, though, if they had that street level organization going into the government. That gives them a different kind of reality that they wouldn't necessarily have. And gives the left a little bit of breathing room, too, that you have the power to be able to do something with that. But they also did fairly well in the European elections fairly recently, and in the first round, with the votes that the first round of the French elections, when they, between the first round of the elections and the second, did they lose votes? Did they just stay the same? Or how was it that they came in third place in that election?
Fundamentally, I mean, I don't want to go into the detail because it's quite complex, but fundamentally they got approximately the same number of votes in the second round. However, the left got many more votes, and also the left was able to unite. That is to say that four political parties, the Greens, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and France in Revolt, the France Insoumise, all very, very quickly, within 3 days, decided that in the face of a possible fascist government, which would have been a horrific idea, that it was absolutely necessary for them to unite. Now, they were under a lot of pressure from below. In fact, it was incredible. When they had the four parties negotiating in a building in Paris, there were a few hundred young people outside chanting up at the windows, unity, unity. So there's very much pressure from below. Everybody you spoke to on the left made it clear that any of the four organizations who had walked out and slammed the door and said, I don't want unity, they would have been really, really punished politically.
Right. Well, before we go into the left and how it's functioned within the election and what it's doing these days, and looking forward to the next couple of weeks, I guess, to see what's going to happen. Let's talk about Macron's party, which is sort of a declining center, or a center that can't find any way to be able to go forward. That gives an impression, at least, that what's happening in France is that there's a left and there's a right, and the people in between, politically not so strong these days. At the same time, they represent very important people within business, within government. They are the establishment. How do you see them trying to figure out the way to go forward? Is there any possibility, for instance, of trying to find some kind of alliance between them and, say, the right-wing groups that are in France? Or exactly what direction does Macron see as a possibility for his government?
Okay, I have to go back a little bit and say what created Macronism. Well, both the traditional right, normal conservative governments and the traditional left socialist party governments had suffered electorally tremendously from the fact that they had brought in neoliberal attacks and austerity, and so they were very much discredited. I mean, the Socialist Party at one point was in government, and then there were elections in which the Socialist Party got 6% of the vote. So there's a massive and very, very rapid discredit. And Macron was able to exist because he said, I'm neither right nor left. I'll take a few leaders from the Socialist Party and a few leaders from the right, and I'm neither right nor left. Now, that's not an illusion that lasted very long, and he reinvented himself a few times. And his latest reinvention is, I am the only protection against the two extremisms, Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon from the France Insoumise. So I'm in the middle, vote for me. But it's not working. He put through a big attack on retirement pensions last year, which was incredibly unpopular. I think it was like 80% of the population and 90% of workers were against it. And people have not forgiven him for that. And that's why he lost so much this time round. Now, he is, of course, hoping to, as we say in French, save the furniture by finding an alliance. But he would have to have all of the right wing except for the National Rally and most of the left wing. So he'd have to talk them into it. Frankly, it doesn't look likely, but it's not impossible because, you never know what people will do. There's huge pressure for this at the moment in the media. They're saying, oh, let's be sensible. We need a coalition. And, oh, look at these stupid left-wing people. They won't ally with the right when everybody knows it's reasonable. Now, so, we might end up with that sort of coalition, which in my opinion would be very bad news because it would not bring in any radical reforms. And 5 years from now, the National Rally would be far stronger because they build on the disappointments and manage to tell people it's all the fault of the immigrants, the fault of the Muslims, so on.
Well, if we look now at some of the program, one of the things about the way people vote, the way they decide whether they're going to go into the streets or not, is the program of an organization as much as anything else. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what program does the left have? How did it show itself to the people of France, saying, let's look at what we can do if we have some way to be able to implement some of these new reforms that we're doing in government. One of the things we hear about a lot here is, and I guess around the world really, is the question of Gaza. And I think that's an important one, obviously for the people of Gaza and for the international way people look at what's going on between Israel and Palestine. But at the same time, people also look, as you said, that there are questions of pension. There are all kinds of social issues that people look at to see exactly what they're going to do, who they're going to vote for, and what organizations they're going to be part of, and what streets they're going to be on, if you will. And could you talk about the organization of the left and how it's come up with the program, and how do people see that as being different from what Macron has been doing and what's happening in a lot of places around the world, if you could?
Yes, so the program, which was put together extremely quickly a few 3 or 4 weeks ago, is actually rather radical program, and this is because of the high influence of the Front Insoumise. So, for example, 15% rise in the minimum wage, 10% rise for all wages in the public sector, stop arming Israel. I'm trying to think of more examples. It's 150 measures. Yeah, disband the most violent police squads. More money for hospitals. Bring back a wealth tax. I mean, I'm not going to give you 150
no,
of these, but it comes out as pretty radical. Oh yes, that's right. So free school meals for all children, that sort of thing. So it's actually quite a up and going thing. Now it was a compromise because the Socialist Party and the Front Insoumise and the Communist Party don't have the same ideas, and so some questions were the result of a compromise. So, for example, in the program, they said that Hamas carried out a terrorist attack on October the 7th, whereas a whole section of the left think that that's not an accurate way of describing it. But that was obviously something that one of the parties said, no, that's a red line. We've got to have that. So quite a radical program because of the Front Insoumise. But I should say that the reason the Front Insoumise exists, that is a new radical left reformist organization. The reason it exists is because of 30 years of quite combative class struggle and a high level of political class consciousness. So when we had the fights about the pensions, and then before that, a few years before that, a fight about work contract conditions for young people, you get millions of people involved who are not personally concerned, who are not affected personally. So political class consciousness is a real thing here. And I should also say that France is really a very political country. I mean, we like to have political meetings where they talk for 2 hours and there's 10,000 people watching, that actually happens here. So that's the case. So a radical program, I would say. Now, as for Palestine, now, obviously, like I say, in the program, it said stop arming Israel. Now, inside the left, you have then the Socialist Party, who was just reviving after their neoliberal phase. The Communist Party, who are trying to find themselves a political space considerably to the right of the Front Insoumise, the Greens, who are fairly what you expect Greens to be, and then the Front Insoumise. Now, the Front Insoumise has put Palestine front and center in its program, and this is one of the reasons that in the multi-ethnic working class suburbs, you can sometimes get 70% for the Front Insoumise, often 60%, because as you know, in all populations with a strong connection to Arab culture and heritage, Palestine is just a huge issue for people.
Well, one of the things that when I was reading some of the things that you were talking about on some of the reports that you made, and other things that I've looked at as well, is that your organization, France Insoumise, is also is seen throughout France as being one of the left organizations that has a real popular base in ethnic communities and developing a base in the working class, more traditional working class industries as well. Could you talk a bit? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense again of the coalition that pulled together for the new Popular Front. Varying histories. I'm sure there were millions of disagreements over the years, but led to an agreement here to fight against the fascists in the elections. At the same time, when you are in a fight, what you do is you develop a sense of who each other is. You learn how to work with each other. You learn the programs, and you work out agreements as well as the disagreements that go along with that. Could you talk about that? Your organization that you're specifically part of has a base and is able to bring up some of these ideas. How much of a base is that? How confident do you feel that the mobilizations that are going on are moving in the direction that you think is going to be important for what France needs?
Okay, well, I'd just like to preface that by saying that the way that the fascists were pushed back into third place in the second round, where they looked so much stronger in the first round, is that we just saw the most dynamic election campaign I have ever seen, and I've been in politics here for 38 years. You had churches and charities and trade unions and university chancellors and singers and footballers. I've never seen anything like it. Several people I know who have not given a leaflet out for 10 years were out leafleting. It really, really moved people into action. And that, in some ways, it can be considered that dynamic way of getting the result was even more important than the result itself. Because let's remember, the fascists nevertheless have 50 more MPs than they had last year. But the actual dynamic is very, very good. Now, who are the France Insoumis? Well, there's a few things about them. And first of all, let's say, if I could give a comparison from the British situation, if Jeremy Corbyn had left the Labour Party, set up a new party, and managed to get, 50,000 activists, that's the sort of party it is. Although must say, I think that the image and influence of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the France Insoumise, is to the left of Corbyn, because it's very open-ended. That is to say that, Mélenchon and our program is, right, we need to move to 100% organic farming, 100% renewable energy. Let's rethink the whole society. Now, the leadership of the France Insoumise talks of this as a program for a citizens' revolution. Now, I'm a Marxist, so I think more of a workers' revolution. But in a situation where the vast majority of the population has no idea what the difference would be between a citizens' revolution and a workers' revolution, it seems to me that a good place for Marxists to work is inside this reformist organization. There are other specific things about the France Insoumise. If I can say the positive things first. Islamophobia has always been a huge problem for the French left. Most of the French left was Islamophobic 20 years ago. When they brought in a law to ban the hijab, the Muslim headscarf, in high schools, and I was on the regional demo against this law, and there were 40 of us. There were 2 Trotskyists and 2 Greens and 2 anarchists and a lot of Muslims. We were absolutely marginalized. And the France Insoumise, although most left organizations have made quite a lot of progress in the last 20 years, but the France Insoumise is the organization that put fighting Islamophobia into the mainstream. And not only is it in the program, the recent program, but also at his biggest meeting, Mélenchon made a particular point of saying, look how important it is that this is in the program. So it's not just written in a footnote. We're making a noise about it. Now, this is still a big fight. There's at least a quarter of left activists who are wildly mistaken on Islamophobia, if they're not actually supporting it. So it's a very specific situation in France on the left there. But that's one thing. The other thing about the France Insoumise is it's not actually a political party. You don't become a member. You become a supporter of the program, and it's organized in ways which are not traditional for political parties. So, for example, sometimes we have delegate conferences, and you put your name in, and the delegates are drawn by lottery. Now, I'm not aiming to defend everything the France Insoumise does by any means. Plenty of criticisms, but I think that the up and down of it is that they've managed to solidify and stabilize a strong radical left reformist movement with the summer schools and the weekend educationals and the local groups of action and the things you need to make it solid and lasting. Of course, there's a crisis going on. There's a small split to the right going on at the moment. Probably 6 or 7 of the 75 members of parliament of the France Insoumise are leaving, pretending that the problem is Jean-Luc Mélenchon's personality, and in fact they just want something less left-wing. But that's okay, because all organizations today in France, every organization without exception is in crisis. It's that sort of situation, and people are going to surprise us a lot, many of them in a bad way and some of them in a good way. That's my opinion.
Well, one of the things that I think you can get a sense of of how people are going to react to what's going on in France is how they're going to react next week to the call for demonstrations when Parliament opens up. And can you? I mean, I know one of the organizations is a section of the union movement, the railroad workers. You have another organization, ATTAC, which is more or less like an NGO organization in France. Those are the couple of ones that I saw that are supporting this demonstration. How are the other parties that are part of the left coalition reacting to the call for demonstrations? Are they saying let's go to the demonstrations? Are they going to be pulling people out for these demonstrations? Is there any discussion of strikes that are going along with this demonstration? Give us a sense of how people are reacting to what Macron is not doing effectively, and what the possibilities are for pressure coming from the left, coming from the rank and file, from the movement in the street to make some kind of an impact on that.
Yes, indeed. Well, a tradition in France, which will seem a little strange for people from the United States, is that things slow down or stop in July and August.
Yeah.
However, this is a particular situation. So the 18th of July, these demonstrations have been called. Now, ATTAC is a campaigning organization with a group of a dozen or a couple of dozen in every town doing popular education against neoliberalism. That's what they do here. Now, one by one, the organizations are calling for these demonstrations, which are both in front of the parliament and in front of regional government headquarters around the country. So the student unions have just called, for example, today. And I'm expecting, well, I'm certainly hoping, but I am expecting more and more organizations to call. I'm not expecting any important organizations to stay outside this. Having said that, I think it would be quite difficult. I mean, I'm not expecting the national trade union leaderships to seriously campaign for strikes at that time. Their excuse will be, organizing strikes in July, half the people are on holiday, which is not completely untrue. I mean, a lot of people have longer holidays here, and if you're not away in July, you're away in August. But I think very often union leaders are happy to have an excuse not to call a strike. But yes, I'm expecting I never like to guess what's happening next week. By trade, I'm a historian, and historians are notoriously bad at telling you what will happen next week. But yes, I'm expecting the demonstrations to be big. There's also an attempt to set up in a whole series of towns permanent new Popular Front committees, sometimes called vigilance committees, to be ready to organize action and demonstration and protest and education against what Macron does or doesn't do. But also I'm hoping that these will organize against the far right. One of the reasons the far right National Rally has done so well in the last 10 years is the left has not been very good. The left has generally been convinced that if you put forward ideas for a program which will make people's lives better, that's enough to rein in the fascists. There hasn't been the emphasis, which I think is necessary, on a mass national campaign of education and harassment just to make life so difficult for the far right. Every time they have a meeting, every time they turn up at a car boot sale, etc.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing pretty good, making it very difficult for them. Are these popular committees, these protest committees, is there a center that's organizing them, or are they coming out spontaneously, if you will, or trade union people involved? One of the things about trade union people, they have a sense of organization, if nothing else, if they've been involved. How are they developing? Or is there a sense of organization of program for them as well, or is it too soon to tell exactly what's going on with that?
I think it is a little soon, and I would say that there's very much a local dynamic in every town. In many ways, left politics has got much more decentralized in the last 30 years. That is to say that there's a far bigger variety of different movements and campaigns and organizations and parties and smaller parties going on, although they often work together. This is also partly because of the internet, because in the past, when I was a young activist, if you didn't go to the meetings, you had no idea what was going on. And if you didn't, photocopy or Roneo
Right.
the newsletters and send them round by post. People didn't know what going on, and of course that's not the case anymore with social network and so on. You can always know what's going on, and so that means that from an organizational point of view, there's less centralization necessary.
One of the things that is of interest to me to see how people are reacting to it are questions that have to do with your program. One of the things I've seen is that the railroad workers they seem to be front and center over a lot of other organizations on supporting what's going on, being more militant, or at least verbally, about what's happening. And I was wondering a little bit why, in the sense that have there been problems, cutbacks? Is a question of nationalization of transportation an issue? How does that fit into why the Railroad Workers Union would be so interested or involved in what's going on?
Okay, well, I might get out of my area of expertise at some point, but certainly the railway workers have a long tradition. Most of the railway workers are still working for a nationalized company. But because of the European Union rules, more and more competition is being imposed, in fact. And so it is possible for private companies to take over, especially freight. Freight rail has been very much privatized. And now, little by little, you're getting private companies come into passenger rail. And it's all really rather unfair in the sense that the private companies just come in and only work the profitable lines, whereas the nationalized railway has to work lines to every town, whatever. We've seen how this works out in England, where they privatize the railways, and then when they make a terrible loss, the government pays it. So you privatize the profits and socialize the losses. But let's say that the railway workers have been involved in major struggles in '95, and every few years there's a major railway conflict, and so they're certainly a very militant, a radical bunch, and I think that's why they would be taking a frontline role here. I should say that while we were waiting to get the Zoom working, I saw the latest announcement, which is for a demonstration in Paris this Sunday. So that's the day after tomorrow, called by student and youth organizations. So that's all. It's all good to, if you have obviously there's the things organized for next Thursday, but if there's an intermediate, the situation is so hot that every few days we need something.
No, I would be surprised if there wouldn't be something. So that's something quite good to hear. There's a couple of organizations I wanted to ask you about as well. But before we do that, there's been some issue in the trucking industry between French truckers and truckers from other countries coming into the country. And that sounds very complicated. And does that have anything to do with what's going on now with either for the right wing or from the left, in the sense of how all of this plays out and people's expectations of how to deal with issues of migration and people coming in from all the countries through trucking, at least? How does that fit into what we're talking about?
No, I mean, it hasn't been a major part of the present crisis. One of the things is that I need to explain to USers is that France is very small, and so like trucking is not, it's big, but it's not big like in the States.
Okay.
It's not that sort of thing. But there has been conflicts because in the European Union, it is possible to have, for example, Hungarian truckers or Eastern European truckers doing work in France, but only receiving the benefits and the social security payments and the pension payments that they would get at home in Hungary or Poland or wherever. And so this means cheap labor for the bosses and less work for local truckers. So this has been something which has caused problems. And indeed, the France Insoumise, somewhere in the France Insoumise program, there's something about, insisting that this should not be allowed, and that every trucker who works in France should get the same conditions. I'm not sure of the technical details, I'm afraid. I did used to work for DAF Trucks France many years ago, but as an English trainer, and so I knew a lot about trucks, but I don't know anything. I don't know much about it now.
One of the things that I think is also important is to see how different sections of working people are relating to what's going on, either organization or individually. And two places where often what you'll find people will be very involved politically in what's going on would be in education and healthcare. And is that true also in some of the things that are going on now? Is there activity within those sectors of the economy for, or can you tell? I mean, sometimes it might be quite hard to tell. If people are organized, might have the banners and everything else. But do you have any sense of education, healthcare, as we talked about with transportation, of how people are being affected?
Yes, I know a lot more about that. First of all, because the education system is very centralized in France, and the neoliberal governments over the last 20 years have regularly, almost every 3 or 4 years, brought in a major reform, partly based on whatever the latest fashionable neoliberal babble is, and reorganizing and messing up teachers' lives in a big way. The latest one was only a few months ago. It's called the shock of knowledge. It's a ridiculously pretentious name for a reform, and it involved all sorts of things like testing school uniform in schools and bringing back more streaming. That is to say, having pupils who are not very good at maths in separate classes from those who were. Pupils who are not getting good results in maths should be in separate classes from those. So the reason for this is not so much education, it's more to please the far-right voters and also to annoy the generally left-wing teachers. In hospitals also, I know that obviously there's been huge numbers of cuts in budgets. That's the big problem. And indeed, my local France Insoumise electoral candidate, who unfortunately lost here, worked in the emergency section of the hospital, and she became well known when she wrote a book, a sort of whistleblower book, about the dreadful working conditions of people in the accident and emergency departments, so that's interesting also because it's a little symbol of the sort of new members of parliament that the France Insoumise is managing to bring in, that there's been quite a number of members of parliament who are very distant from the grey apparatchiks who we sometimes have to get used to. So, people who's one of the youngest who's just been elected member of parliament is known as the founder of an anti-fascist organization, and there's another one who's known as the guy who organized taxi drivers to fight against the Uberization of their industry. So we've got a whole load of class fighters being elected as members of parliament, and that's of course one of the things that the bourgeoisie love to hate.
One of the things I read about 6 months ago, a year ago, there were demonstrations throughout France for the elimination of healthcare services in rural areas, shutting down emergency rooms. I think also shutting down some hospitals as well. That can cut a couple different ways. If it's rural areas, at least in the United States, you tend to think that the right wing can take advantage of those kinds of issues and really do something with that. And I was wondering if that's true also in France, or whether the left is able to say, no, this is the problem of capitalism, or this is the problem of the budget, whatever it happens to be. But for the left also to be able to say, we have a solution to those problems, and it's not the right wing that's going to be able to help in that situation. Do you have any sense of the rural-urban, and using that maybe as an example, the rural-urban division that happens in some places?
This is very important because older people living in rural areas are the very center of the far-right vote. Far more important. To give you an idea, if you take the Paris region, including Paris and all the suburbs, many of them poor around, huge area, well, 9% of the far-right voters live here, and 21% of the left voters live here. So the rural-urban split is very important. And we saw this come up 3 or 4 years back with the Yellow Vest movement, which I'm sure you must have heard a little
Right.
about. And this was a revolt of a popular revolt of poor workers, unemployed people, and small bosses in the rural areas who were partly fed up of being ignored by Paris, and partly like revolting against poverty, but also against the lack of public services and so on. And this was a tremendously interesting movement, because these are areas where the vote for the far right is very high, and the far right tried very hard to profit from this movement and to be there in the middle of it, say, you know what, we're your people. And a huge amount of very detailed, patient work over months and months in particular by CGT trade union people, but also by left people, managed to neutralize that and bring the mainstream of the Yellow Vest movement more towards a left-wing orientation. Of course, it doesn't work perfectly, but this could have become a major encouragement for the far right, and it wasn't. So the far right profit from the fact that from rural poverty and rural lack of public services, and they get a lot of votes that way. Generally by saying, of course, the reason you don't have public services is all the money is going to the immigrants. That's absolute nonsense by any statistical point of view. And also, of course, you have this very standard contradiction where the people who are voting far right because they're terrified of immigrants live in towns where there are very few immigrants indeed, because immigrants tend to go to the big towns where the jobs are. So yes, certainly the rural-urban split is an important thing, and it's been important to put it into the left program. Again, the farmers revolted last year. You know, we have a lot of revolts in France. The farmers revolted last year, and again, there was a mix of demands, because some of the farmers were demanding guaranteed basic prices for the foodstuffs for the crops they're selling. And some of them were demanding abolish all the green regulations and the ecological regulations. And of course, the left had to be quite intelligent to say yes we want we want minimum prices. We want farmers to live better. We want to do something about the fact that there's, I think, 3 or 4 farmers every week committed suicide in France. But of course, as you can imagine, the Macron government said, "Oh, we understand you farmers," and promptly abolished a whole series of ecological regulations, because that's the sort of thing that didn't bother the big bosses. Whereas if the farmers had to receive guaranteed prices for their crops, then the big supermarket chains would lose out, and so on. It has to be said that big variety in farmers in France, but many of them are extremely poor. I mean, they're just working 60 hours a week for just enough to eat.
Right.
It's very situation. I'm sure you have that in parts of the States.
No, it's very much part of what's going on here. I mean, the whole dynamic, I mean, it's an international dynamic. It's happening every place, any place you can look, sometimes worse, sometimes not so much. But it's the same thing. I think what's going on in France is so relevant to what's happening in the U.S., and that people should know and should be able to see what's going on as a possibility for what's happening here. You know, that's extremely important. When you look at what's going on in France, though, that you see differently than, you have, because of the size of what's going on, it's different from here. But you have organizations that in the past, as we said earlier in our conversation, that didn't get along, had different programs, and come from some place historically, willing to work together, to be able to fight together on a program, first of all, but also to fight together against a right-wing development that was happening in France. How is that coalition holding up? You could see, as you mentioned earlier, some people even on the sort of the left wing of that coalition are looking for possibilities outside of the left as a way to go forward. But organization, how do things look in the sense, each one I'm sure has divisions. The Greens have their own factions, the CP, the Socialist Party. You were talking about some people for instance, in some ways also having those kind of issues. But at the same time, when people work together in a fight, like what you've been able to do over the past week at least, or a couple of weeks, that can also change attitudes about how to work together as well. Could you give us a sense then of how you feel this coalition is holding up, and how does that look going forward? You have a fairly conservative, historically conservative part of that left, if you will, with the Socialist Party. You have the Communist Party, the Green Party, the left wing, which has probably, I would guess, different sort of hardened left organizations within it working. So it's complex. And that complexity can work itself through in struggle, but at the same time, it could also hurt struggle, depending on how it works out. And I was wondering what your sense of that is.
Yes, well, I think that the coalition or the electoral alliance was very much influenced from pressure from below. I think they weren't given any choice. As for its future, it's hard to say. I mean, certainly there are parts of it which are, let's say, they're working in the alliance, but they're not necessarily very loyal. In particular, because the right wing has been organizing a massive smear campaign against Jean-Luc Mélenchon, sections of the Socialist Party and Greens have joined in and saying, and they do it in very underhand ways, along the lines of, I don't know how anti-Semitic Jean-Luc Mélenchon is. Any honest person knows that he's not, excuse my French, that he's not at all anti-Semitic. But let's say that some of the softer sections of the left are happy for the smear campaign to go on because it will weaken the radical left. Mélenchon has become the center of right-wing hate and soft left hate, not because of himself at all, but although he's a pretty smart guy, but because he represents an open-ended radical break with neoliberal business as usual. So on all sorts of things, he says, yeah, let's have a new constitution. Let's get rid of the president has far too much power. Let's rethink every aspect of society. That's what Jean-Luc Mélenchon represents today in France, and that's why he is attacked in the most vicious ways. And I mean, on the national public radio, they will just say, in passing, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, of course, many people consider him anti-Semitic, and that'll continue. There won't be anybody to contest that. And of course, he's been considered anti-Semitic because of his support for Palestine. So let's say that there's sections of the Left Alliance who are working within the Left Alliance, but they're looking to weaken other elements. I would say that on the ground, however, like I'm in a suburb of Paris, and where you get places where there's people from different organizations working together very well indeed. So I'm kind of hoping that will continue. But again, I don't really know what's going to go next. I mean, nothing succeeds like success. Yeah, that is, if the new Popular Front coalition gets some successes under its belt, then there will be less infighting. It's always in my opinion, it's always the external situation which in the final analysis determines how well people are going to treat each other on an everyday basis. The politics is behind it. This is why all the long discussions about the dangers of Jean-Luc Mélenchon's personality. It's absolute nonsense. It's a political disagreement that people don't want to talk about as a political disagreement, and so they're going to launch it as he's too one of the people who wants to leave the France Insoumise is just saying the problem is that he uses too much noise, and we need tenderness in politics today. The new tenderness is the new. This is absolute. I'm sure you have a rude word for this in American too. It's absolute nonsense. In fact, he's looking for another political option that is a less left-wing political option, but he's pretending that it's something about personality.
Well, most of this will come down to organizing, like everything else does. And I think what you said earlier about success gives you success. The way I look at the movements, they're like whirlwinds, and as they speed up, they'll pull people in. As they slow down, people will fall off. And right now,
Absolutely.
what you're having is there's a real whirlwind in France, and that's pulling people in. How quick that, what direction it goes in, and how quickly that'll go in whatever direction that happens to be, will be determined, I guess, over the next couple of weeks to some extent. You have the demonstrations on Sunday of this week. You have the demonstrations on the 18th. You have something to look forward to, which is quite nice. So that sounds quite hopeful.
Yes, There are many dangers, but every danger is an opportunity.
Exactly.
I mean, I have a lot of comrades saying, "Oh, be careful! There are many traps." Of course, there are many traps, but that's politics.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, I mean, this is a horrendous thing we have with the elections that are going on here. But at the same time, it is that. It's a way to educate people about what the reality is of politics. A little bit different than what you have in France. The kind of organization, it's so nice to see. It's refreshing to see the possibilities of what you can do with watching what's happening in your country as well. Unless there's something else, John, that you feel that you want to explain, I'd like to thank you. So how do you feel about things going forward?
Yes, I need to get to the end now. I mean, what's going forward is really. It is very important what kind of government we have. I mean, of course, there are a lot of people on the left who say elections are not very important, but these elections were going to give us a fascist government or not give us a fascist government. So for a couple of weeks, elections were extremely important, and we won this electoral battle. Now, can those tens of thousands of people, probably more, probably hundreds of thousands of people who got involved in the election campaign and the anti-fascist campaign over the last 3 weeks, can we keep them mobilized and push for progress and push the fascist back? I don't know. We're going to give it a try.
Oh, you're doing very well. And the whole world is watching, as they say. Wish you much luck. And if you don't mind, maybe down the road we can talk some more, especially after the next couple of weeks, to see what goes on and how things are looking.
That would be fine. Yes. That would be fine.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us today. If you think this conversation with John Mullen is an important one, share it with friends and social media, and let's see if we can spread the word on what's happening in France and make sure the good things that are happening there don't stay there. I'm Wayne Heimbach.